weak private sector growth. Jobs report comes out, but most of those jobs came from, really the census jobs. They'll go away in a month, month and a half. And so what does it really tell us? The weak private sector growth, the sell-off on Wall Street. What does it really speak to us about?
Well, businesses need two things to expand. They need customers and they need capital. And the things that haven't been fixed are the huge trade deficit, which is making too many dollars go overseas but not come back to buy U.S. exports, so there's not enough demand for what businesses make. And the TARP really didn't help those 8,000 regional banks. Every weekend, the FDIC closes another 3, 4, 5 banks. They don't have money to lend. The TARP funded big bonuses on Wall Street, but it didn't help all those businesses out there that create the jobs hire or get the financing they need to pay for the equipment workers need.
And, Michael, we know for African-American businesses, they're likely to get their loans from community banks, from regional banks.
Right, and there's a big problem right now still with particularly small business lending. You know, the big companies, the bond market's functioning much better than it did. I mean, a lot was done, in fact, including TARP, which helped restore lending at the highest levels for the big guys. But for the little guys, it's still very tough. And the president has some proposals to deal with that, and I think that's very important. Sort of going back to your question about what did the jobs report mean, I think what it means is that the economy is still teetering. Because the month before, we'd had a very positive jobs report. Things were looking good. Then we have a bad one. I think things can still go either way.
Now, we've always looked at jobless claim as a leading economic indicator. But should we still focus on that? Because it seems every month when the report comes out, as you said, last month people say, oh, good thing. Next month, man, not so good. So what really should we be looking at to measure how the economy is doing to get a better understanding?
People should be focusing on the jobless claims. Although weekly data, and those are weekly, tend to go up and down, those have actually been pretty consistent. You know, yesterday people made a big deal that the number of continuing claims went away. Well, that's because the jobless benefits are running out. So many people are beyond the limit, they're no longer collecting, and they've quit the labor force. Still, we're losing about 450, 460 jobs a month, in the sense a week, people filing unemployment insurance. That number has to get down below 350, down to 325, before we start to have a healthy jobs picture. Wall Street misread yesterday. It's unfortunate. The market often does that in both directions.
Yeah, I would say that I actually don't put as much stock in the weekly numbers, but I think the monthly jobs numbers that people do focus on are one of the key things. I think that's very important. I also think, the traditional measures of gross domestic product have meaning as well. I mean, if we're not having broad economic growth, we're not going to have jobs. But it is the next key indicator is whether that growth is translating into jobs, and the best measure of that is those monthly numbers that we get.
Peter, earlier you said TARP was not beneficial to regional banks. Yet we're also hearing people say the key to this, we need more stimulative spending. Is that really the answer when you have a Republican Party, where you have congressmen all over the place who are saying, look, we are going to ride fiscal conservatism back to power? Does that make sense?
If there's ever something that's been misunderstood, it's the role of stimulus spending. For the Democrats, any kind of spending is stimulus. It's magic. For the Republicans, it's absolutely evil. The reality is it's someplace in between. It depends on how you spend the money. If you put money out there to renovate a school and you hire a local contractor who uses local materials and local labor, you're going to get jobs. If you put money into a green building that'll be built 6 years from now, and in the meantime you put $2 million into an architect, you put 2 people to work, the architect and his receptionist. Too much of the stimulus money was spent that way. And also, a lot of the construction money went into Chinese imports, which don't create many jobs here. You have to spend it right. The Chinese did, and they got a lot of stimulus out of their $500 billion. We didn't, and we didn't get much stimulus out of our $800 billion.
Michael, agree or disagree?
I completely disagree with that. I mean, I think, look, there was a small portion of the money that doesn't get spent out for a longer period of time, but almost all the money goes out in the first 2 years, which was always the intention. Most of the money went to the things like, building roads, building bridges, that sort of thing, or a third of it went to tax cuts. It was a very small portion of it, I think, would meet the characterization that he had.
Well, only $100 billion went into infrastructure spending, and the president promised us brick and mortar. A third of it went approximately into tax cuts. It didn't work for Bush, a good Republican, and it didn't work for Obama, a good Democrat, because people are rebuilding their savings.
I think it did work. I mean, we were losing 750,000 jobs a month when the stimulus package passed. We're now starting to gain jobs. I mean, we averted having a Great Depression. And this comes back to the TARP as well. I'm not a big fan of the way the TARP was done, but on the other hand, I think we would have had a complete financial collapse, which would have taken down not just the national banks, but the regional banks as well, if we hadn't done the TARP. Now, there's lots of mistakes were made in the TARP that was passed, in late 2008. But when we're getting back to the stimulus, I mean, I think it's been a huge improvement. Now, we have a long ways to go before we have a strong economy creating jobs. But in terms of what the stimulus was designed to do, I think it did it.
It's also ending, though.
It's ending, and we're not out. I think it's important looking forward to say, what can we do? Where do the solutions lie? I mean, not all stimulus spending has equal traction. So if we're going to have a second jobs bill, then we have to make sure that it's focused, it's spent on American products, and it's spent on putting people to work here and now, especially within the demographics that really need work. With regard to the TARP, some of that money's coming back. During the savings and loan crisis, we had a resolution trust which made a profit for the government. The big New York banks didn't want that, so the resolution trust wasn't created. We didn't clean up the books of the regional banks, and they continue to fail. We have to come up with a solution to the regional banks. So, for example, African-American businesses can borrow.
And also, let's be clear, black businesses, stimulus, 1% of those contracts, abysmal, Hispanics, 2%. So you had the two largest groups when it comes to being unemployed, also not truly benefiting from those same stimulus contracts.
When you use your stimulus money to build windmills, you end up buying the components in China. It doesn't matter whether you're white or black or whatever. You're not going to get any of that money if the money goes to China.